Welcome back, viewers, listeners, whoever you are out there. This is episode 8, I believe, season 4, episode 8. We have a very special guest for a very special movie. Mike and I would like to welcome this episode's special guest, father, husband, chef, educator, and pot stirrer extraordinaire. That's kind of an inside joke because Francois loves to stir the pot. This is Francois Deadman DeYoung. Woo! Welcome, Francois. Now, listen, before I get into what this week's, this episode's movie is, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and why we chose you for this episode?
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, so I am a Red Seal chef by trade. I've been working in the industry for over 25 years all over the world. My connection to movies is that I worked on the Pirates of the Caribbean, cooking for Johnny Depp and all these major stars. So I have that connection there.
What's Johnny Depp allergic to? Do you know? Any food allergies we should know about?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
He he's basic. He loves.
I think he's allergic to anything with herd in it.
Yeah. I can see that.
Well done.
Thank you.
Poo in his bed.
Yeah. So I love cooking, and this movie really resonated with me. I learned about it out of just a food article and the chef that did the food stylist on the movie. So that's where I kind of was like, wow, I want to check this movie out.
Night of the Living Dead. That's what we're talking. Oh wait.
Oh no! Spoilers. A couple episodes ago,
Lee tends to spoil most things in the first half of the episode
I gave
anyway.
some major spoilers away in one of our movies. And I'm like, oh god! So I had to put a spoiler alert at the beginning instead of in the middle. So it's all good. We are doing our movie for this episode is the 2022 black comedy mystery thriller with some sizzling social commentary. Do you see what I did there? The Menu. By Searchlight Pictures. The runtime's about an hour 47. Is it Malode? How do you pronounce his last name? Mark Malode?
Yeah, I thought Malode.
Malode. Okay, that's what I thought too. Director's Mark Malode. It's written by Seth Reese and Will Tracy. The cast is Rafe Fiennes as Chef Slowick. Yes, thank you. Anya Taylor-Joy, one of our favorites, as Margot. Nicholas Hoult, he's been on a recent episode of ours as
and
Tyler.
Anya Taylor-Joy, both of them.
And then some other recognizables like John Leguizamo, Judith Light, Janet McTeer. You might, if you're old like me, you might recognize some of those faces.
Is that gonna fit everyone?
Easily. 12 customers total.
How do they turn a profit?
$12.50 a head, that's how.
What are we eating, a Rolex?
You have to try the mouthfeel at the Mignonette.
Please don't say mouthful.
Welcome to Hawthorne.
Here we are family. We harvest, we ferment, we gel.
They gel.
We gel.
Why do you care?
I have to know if you're with us or with them.
So this got 7.2 on IMDb, 88% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, and 76% audience score. Like a lot of the movies that we've done in this season anyway, seem to be a higher critic score than audience score.
I was curious how that one would break on this one. I assumed the critic score would be high.
Yeah.
It's not quite as low an audience score as some, but yeah, definitely a bit of a dip.
And we'll get into, I think, the reason why. So let me give you a brief summary. A young couple travels to a remote island to eat at an exclusive restaurant where the chef has prepared a lavish menu and some shocking surprises. So, Francois, why don't we start with, you mentioned that you came across this in an article. Is that correct?
Yeah. So an article, and I can't remember what magazine it came out of, or I think a website, eater.com, which is a great website for food. And just talking about this chef who is a 3-star Michelin chef. She has actually 4 stars. She runs 3 restaurants in San Francisco, and one of my favorite chefs to follow. And just seeing her evolution, and her name is Dominique Crenn. Yeah, and so you could actually, if you're interested, you can find her on season 2 of Chef's Table on Netflix.
Okay. Yeah.
And she's just amazing, an inspiration not only in how she runs her restaurants, but just the food that she creates. And so, it's just like, oh wow, this is going to be cool, right? So what is this movie about? And how does the food tie in? And so
did the article spoil the film at all, or just recommended that you go watch it?
just recommended that, hey, you should go see, this is what's happening in this movie.
Okay.
And so we've got a top chef that's going to
Okay.
be styling all this food. So
Oh, cool.
for me, it's just really interesting, right? Knowing her background, and also just that line between, you know, flavors and presentation,
Right.
and just getting that inspiration from that. So that was my hook right there.
So did you have any, it doesn't sound like the article gave too much away. Did you have any expectations going in? Like, did you know sort of, so the reason I asked the question is, for myself, I looked at the cast and I thought, oh, this is like, it's a great cast. I was a little bit leery. I think, Mike, you might have watched it first.
Yeah, I think I recommended
you
it.
recommended
And you
it.
actually watched it when I recommended it, which I couldn't believe.
I know it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
But I actually looked at the scores on IMDb and stuff, and I knew it was going to be good. And I knew by the cast alone that it was going to be a strong film. But there's something about it. I'm like, how are they going to do like a / horror film with this kind of concept? And I didn't know much about it. I looked. The trailers, thankfully, didn't give anything away, the ones that I saw anyway. So did you have any expectations going in about like what you might see?
I didn't have any
Okay.
expectations. And
Perfect.
it was really just the chef that drew me in. So it was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
Did you know it was horror, though?
Or
did you
I
think you
knew
were just,
that it was
like-
a horror.
Yeah.
But, you know, what interested me also was just like, how is this going to reflect my experience in the restaurant industries? And there was some things in there that I was like, yeah, that, oh, okay, I've seen that. Maybe not at that level.
Right.
But these sort of
That's cool.
things can.
I'm curious to
kinda
know
happen.
if you were offended at all by this film or whether you appreciated it, because I could see if you were in that world, maybe feeling a bit
No,
defensive.
I wasn't offended at
No,
all.
okay.
It was. I thought it was really well done. I have to say right off the bat, I love spoilers, and so having a movie spoiled for me doesn't affect my enjoyment of the movie.
Right. Cool.
And so
You love what makes you love spoilers? That's interesting. That's an
I think it's just hey,
uncommon.
if I'm gonna spend an hour watching a movie or 2 hours watching a movie, is this how am I going to be happy with the outcomes? And so I can appreciate the artistry around that.
Huh.
Right. So
So do you read the last page of a book as well? Is that what you do? Like you go to the end?
He
and
reads
then
it
you-
backwards.
no, I
you look
am
at the end?
dyslexic, so that would make sense. I just read it from the back and start. So I don't know what it is about that, but I actually really
Okay,
don't
that's
mind.
cool. Yeah, interesting.
Spoilers. And I think especially for horror movies, I have to say I really appreciate this podcast because it's changed the way I look at horror movies and just that I realize that I've actually watched a lot of horrors, but that learning about the genres has really kind of affected how I choose my
Interesting.
movies or my horror movies. So
Would you have described yourself as a fan of horror movies, or did you kind of avoid that genre before
I think
listening to our podcast?
before listening to your podcast, I would say no, I don't like horrors, and then I suddenly realized like, wow, there's actually a lot of horrors that I really like, but it's the type of horrors I
Yeah.
like horrors that develop tension, and I thought this movie did a great job of developing that
I agree.
tension
Yeah.
that I really appreciate in a horror movie.
And your check's in the mail, by the way.
I
just
was going to
so-
say,
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
swear we didn't pay him to say any of that.
Thank you for that. I just, you know, I watched it again, admittedly on fast forward today, but I wanted to have it fresh in my mind, the visuals in the film, because so much of the film was about visuals. And I mean, even on fast forward, I really enjoyed the performances, and there were a couple of times I was like, no, I got to watch this scene over again. Like I really need to see this scene. And I wouldn't call myself a fan of Ralph Fiennes. Like, I mean, I think he does.
Oh, really?
Well, I'm not like a uber fan. I
Okay.
think he does really good work. I'm just not necessarily.
You don't have a poster of him in your bedroom.
No,
that's what you're saying.
exactly.
Okay.
I don't have any T-shirts of him either. So having said that, I thought, this is an interesting role for him, especially when it started at the beginning. But he has often chosen very interesting roles in his career, and
Because I think of Ray Fiennes as like a top tier
absolutely,
actor. Like
absolutely.
if he's in it, I assume it's probably going to be good or
Yeah.
decent.
Although, you know, and I think you're absolutely right, because I don't think he's made, at least that I can recall, any choices like somebody like Michael Caine, right? Like Michael Caine was very clear about, I do bad movies so I can do good movies. And he made no bones about, I've done some real dogs. I got paid. That's how it is. This is my job. And there are many actors, I think, who choose to do roles where they get paid so that they can do perhaps. Ed Norton, I think, was just Edward Norton was just talking about working with Wes Anderson and the fact that he pays nothing. But
interesting.
he'll take other films so that he can take a Wes Anderson film
Cool.
because he knows the paycheck's not going to be very good. But he loves working with Wes Anderson. So, but I don't think Ray Fiennes has ever done anything that was that I can think of that was sub top tier. But
Because he did like English Patient and
absolutely.
Schindler's List, and like he's done some very top tier stuff. Yeah,
I mean, he's like his performance is great. And go ahead.
And he actually, I thought of a chef that I worked under that was like, wow, this is him right
That's
here,
cool.
right?
Yeah,
like,
that's great.
So he did his homework, and he had that presence of a chef, and restaurants have changed a lot. The environment has changed a lot, and but he still has that presence of like, I'm not going to yell at you, but the way I'm talking to you right now,
it clearly indicates
this is what you need to do right now, or this is not adequate, or I need your attention right now, and it's really like, yes chef.
Those scenes were so great, like the clap and then yes chef, and it was all in unison, and it was like those. Yeah, it was like boot camp. You just thought that this is the guy who's in charge. He has the confidence and the demeanor of somebody who's at the top of his game, who is completely in charge, completely confident.
And was that a fairly accurate representation? I know that's sort of the stereotype, that kind of like militant top down, like I'm running my kitchen like I would run, I don't know, like the way that they represented that kind of kitchen at a 3 Michelin star restaurant, does that seem
I'd
authentic?
say for a 3 Michelin star restaurant, for sure. For a 2 Michelin star restaurant, for a 1 Michelin star restaurant, for sure. And even when I'm working with students, it's not always the chef that you say yes chef to, but the person that's leading the service. Right? So I'll have students come in and they're leading the service, and it's like, hey, when this student calls an order or asks for something, it is yes chef, and everyone answers yes chef. And it creates a cadence and respect.
Right.
And
I was just going to say, yeah.
And there's I think the old school Gordon Ramsay way of doing things, which thank goodness it's changing.
Are you an idiot sandwich?
Yeah. So that's really changing, but there's still this space of like, there is tension in these restaurants, and you need that tension because there's timing and cadence, and it all starts with yes chef.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned tension a couple times, but yet the comedy, like I really picked. There's so many good lines in this movie. I almost think the script is the best part. I was just laughing out loud so many times, just really scathing satire. That it's a very delicate balance, the kind of tension and horror and the comedy. And in the end, I felt almost more of the comedy. But maybe if you're more affected by horror films and by the horrific things, like my wife watched it and she hated it because she was so horrified by the horror elements. But because I'm not that bothered by that stuff, I really just picked up on the comedy and thought it was amazing. But how did you find the balance there?
Yeah, I loved it. And I laughed about a situation I was in with a very wealthy family. They had hired me to do an event, and this is years ago. And while I was prepping for that event for 100 people, I was on my own. It was in the middle of nowhere in this like multi-million-dollar house. And they went to this, the kids went to a private school, and they were getting into an argument about having to make cookies for a school event. And the husband, without even looking at me, said, "We've hired him. Why isn't he making the cookies?" And it was just like, I thought about like some of the lines in the delivery and how that kind of rolls into, the social commentary.
Totally.
And I remember just sitting back and thank goodness that his partner was like, well, because he's doing this. But it was just this person that had, just no clue about that. And you see some of this dark humor in this movie.
Is that alginate? And she's like, oh, Pondscum? Like there's just so many good ones.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny that I agree with you 100%. The script is fantastic. It was, although I got a lot of the humor, it was a lot of the jibes, I think, that I really liked. And like that it's such a classic line when Elsa leans over to it's not John Leguizamo's character, it's one of the bro.
Oh yeah, the bro guys. Yeah,
And she goes, "You'll eat less than you desire and more than
but you deserve. That was good.
It was just like those kinds of things I live for, like those lines, the way they're delivered. And there's one as I was watching at the end, towards the end, there was one where Anya Taylor-Joy's character says, and the worst part is that I'm still fucking hungry. And I don't want some fancy deconstructed avant bullshit.
Yeah,
right?
I wrote that
I mean,
down
it was
too.
just, I just love, I mean, we've already talked about satire. Maybe that's a good way to get into it. Like, I think, and Francois, maybe you can pick up where I leave off here, but I think the satire around foodies, food culture, and food critics in particular is just in your face, right?
Oh, nonstop
yeah,
throughout
yeah.
the whole thing. You know,
What about the food critic? What did you think? Because that her and
Would you
and
say
her-
thalassic? It's like, oh yeah, the
yeah.
thalassia in the sea, and oh, you're eating the ocean, or like, there's so many good lines.
There are. And, there's so many things. I want to just go back to Elsa
Please, yeah,
first. And I thought that actor did an amazing job as the maitre d', you know, just making sure that everything was in line, right? So that the communication with the chef, the unsaid words, the hey, I know what's going on here, and you need to be seated right now, please. And you know, this starts getting into some of the spoilers, some of my favorite spots, but I thought that she did an amazing job in that role. And she had some of the best lines in the movie.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
From the start, introduction to where
Yeah.
they were.
All the performances are so good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the characters kind of walk this line of caricature, but they're deep enough that they're still pretty rich, and they all have pretty good lines, I think. The Tyler guy's hilarious, too. Nicholas Holt's character.
Yeah.
Those are some of the worst conversations I get into when I feel like I get cornered and people are like, oh, let me show you some of my Instagram pictures and let me show you this. And I'm just like... Yeah, I'm super excited about
the taco, whatever was on the taco
I really,
shelves is so
I really
good.
appreciate people love to cook and they love to,
Sure.
but there's running a restaurant is different, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And that, so seeing his character, I was just like, oh yeah.
Well, he's so, I mean, and there again, that was some of the such good satire is that he's such a pretentious wannabe dick, and he's just so good as that character, and it's such a departure from his character in Renfield.
Totally. And he does so many subtle things, like horrific things are kind of happening in the background.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there like loving his food and taking pictures, and like you don't really notice unless you're paying attention, but just he's always in character and always doing these little subtle things that just make him that much
like the worst
douchier.
thing is happening and he's like, oh, there's some leftovers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we'll get into it in spoilers, but I think I felt this is going to be terrible to say, but I felt so good when Chef called him out on his stuff, and I was like, you deserve everything you get. And that was the other thing too. I felt like, you know, the bro startup culture, the kind of has-been TV star that John Leguizamo plays. I just felt like from top to bottom, they just nailed the social satire
on so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and everyone had their role, and
and the things they make fun of, like fine dining for, I think was pretty good. Like the first plate when they're plating it, it's like a giant rock and all these plants and twigs. And there's like a tiny little morsel of food. The thing is like this big, and here's this tiny little bit of food, which is kind of sometimes how you feel with these, like, you watch these Netflix chef shows and the plating is so extravagant. But is it maybe borders on pretentious at some points? But maybe you would have a different perspective on that. I don't know.
Yeah. So there are some restaurants out there. Like if you went to the Perrier Top 50 restaurants, like every restaurant on that list, it's an experience, right? And you pay for that experience.
And they talk about that exact thing.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
It's very elite.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, oh, I got to fly to Denmark and I need to have some serious money to order this meal and then to sit down and eat it. It's not something you do on a first date, right? You know, I have never had a meal like that, but a lot of times I hear people say like, yeah, I was stuffed. I was really stuffed because you're eating 25, maybe 50 little portions, but maybe of some of the tastiest food you've ever had in your life. And these restaurants are inspiring. But if you looked at like a grapevine and all the bushels of grapes on them, and that there's one grape on that vine that is that chef that can create and manage a team that's doing it at that level,
right,
every day, right, and
so like the breadless bread,
breadless bread, so good. What she said, like, oh, there's a broken emulsion here, and then brings the giant, just so good.
Yeah, that was so good.
But I was curious, so as someone who is in that world, so you weren't like, it does seem like they're taking some pretty good jabs at kind of the fine dining world, like just the like the pretentious overplating, or things like, oh, this emulsion is broken, or like it was funny when they're in the guy's making something in the kitchen, he holds up this little thing up to the light to make sure it's perfect. Like, so you didn't feel defensive at all, or like they were maybe taking jabs at that culture or that? No.
I mean, you're right. Like, if we take ourselves so seriously that we see a movie, then it's like, oh yeah, where am I in that movie?
Yeah.
Right. Where do I fit in? And I think that is the chef actually having that realization throughout the movie. And kind of having this life-changing realization. How he handled it was like, ooh.
Well, he says towards the end, you know, speaking to the guests at the restaurant, you represent the ruin of my art. And to me, that was the culmination of his epiphany, right? And I shouldn't say culmination because he realized it long before he spoke it. He knew that going into this evening that with these people.
Yeah,
right?
and I think this is not just the chef's world, but I think anything that you do and have passion with, and this is maybe my experience of coming to a place where you've realized, like, hey, this is where I've maxed out, and things are going to change, and I can't continue moving on like this. I have to make a change, this is teetering on spoiler, but like the second course, I think it was the second course, maybe it was a third course, where one of the chefs does some dramatic stuff. That it's like, whoa, we could talk about that in the spoilers, and how does that fit into everyday restaurants and where people are, and getting over your ego, because I think a lot of it was about ego and moving forward through life. So on so many levels, I thought it was a great movie. I have to ask both of you though, I am challenged with it being a horror. So when you asked me to be on the podcast, I was like, is this a horror? Hereditary, I know how you both feel about Hereditary. I want to watch it. I haven't watched it. I haven't built up the courage to watch it yet. But
we keep running into these films that are very much on the cusp. For me, a good metric is when I watch with my wife. If she leaves, I'm like, okay, maybe it was a horror movie, because she, said it was horrific. And because I think as horror fans, you get desensitized to that sometimes. It's harder to feel like you watched a horror film. Like, we were debating with Silence of the Lambs whether that was a horror film.
Right.
And I asked my mom, and she's like, if you are a woman, then that is absolutely a horror film. She's like, that movie terrified me. So I think sometimes when you watch a lot of horror and you see very extreme horror, when you see something that's a little less horrific, maybe then you tend to think, oh, this didn't feel like horror to me, because our bar is so... But then I wonder, with your average moviegoer, like, this is on Disney Plus, and I could see lots of people just, oh, hey, Ray Fiennes, Disney Plus, click, and then being like, oh man, this is insane.
But then horror, like, oh, this is horrific, or is it one of those things like, wow, this is about mental health, and there are some challenging shots in here.
I think that's so. When we had the conversation about Silence of the Lambs, like, I argued that it like many of the films that we've talked about this season, surprisingly, that they have horrific elements or horrific scenes, but they don't operate as a horror film. So on the surface, the run through of this film, this is not it's not your average horror film. There aren't jump scares. There aren't the typical horror movie tropes. There are horrific things that happen, I think, that make it, that kind of tip it over into that horror
With this
genre.
one?
With this one.
It's almost, it doesn't have all the trappings of a slasher film, but there is a little bit of that formula. Like, in a way, you have a final girl, you have a cast of kind of deplorable characters who get killed off over time.
Yeah.
It's not with it's not a traditional slasher, but part of me, when I was watching, like, this is almost like a slasher film a little bit. I don't think it is, but I think it's enough. It has enough DNA with it that you could put it in the horror genre fairly comfortably.
Taking the crew apart one by one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have your maniacal antagonist. You have your final girl. I do think that there are adjacent elements. There are horrific, although they're not jump scares. There was a scene that you referred to where I was like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. And it was fantastic. But I think it's what I love about films like this, and we can argue till the cows come home about, is it horror, isn't it horror? But the horrific scenes combined with great acting, great writing, just unbelievable food shots and overhead shots of things going on. It was just so good. It was a visual, like I mentioned just before we started taping today, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, which I saw. And it was one of the few films, and sorry to have a digression here, but the reason I bring it up is because that was one of the few films that I had a visceral reaction to on screen. I saw it in the Roxy Theater in Victoria.
Wow.
So on the big screen, the food is so rich. The textures are so rich. There's lots of velvet. There's lots of heavy materials. There's lots of heavy foods and cream. And there are just scenes in there that I reacted to probably emotionally, but physically, viscerally. And again, that's not classed as a horror film, but there's horrific things that go on in that movie. And I would argue the same thing here. Yeah, it doesn't land as a traditional horror film, but I think there's enough horrific elements that make it that way.
Yeah, and this is an overgeneralization. I think people who grew up watching horror movies in like the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like they followed a bit of a formula. You got Freddy and Jason and slashers, and it was very clear what a horror film was. But it seems the last 20 years or so, horror has kind of branched out into these other genres, and it's not as easy as just, there's a slasher and 8 teenagers, and they're going to get picked off all the time, and there's a horror movie. They blend into romance and comedy and drama. But I do think they are still horror movies, but it's harder to pinpoint. But I think the reaction of the audience, and certainly watching this with my wife, we're trying to get some people to watch it, or they're like, no, I can't handle that.
Well, here's a good example. Like, I just watched, in preparation for the release of the upcoming Exorcist film, there was one of the Exorcist movies that I hadn't seen, Dominion, the prequel. It's horrible. I mean, on the surface, it's all
worse than Exorcist 2?
It was worse than Exorcist. I'd rather go watch Exorcist 2 again.
That is a bold
Worse
statement.
than Winnie the Pooh?
No.
Okay.
No. Let's draw the line somewhere. It did have Stellan Skarsgård in it, so it wasn't that bad. No, but so the reason, again, I bring that up is because that's, class as a horror film. It falls into this, the Exorcist world. But I would argue because it was so bad, it doesn't even come off, and it's not bad in a good way. If you know what, like, it's not bad and, oh, that's so funny, I can make fun of that. It was just bad all the way around. I would much rather watch a film like this that's kind of horror adjacent, but a really solidly well done film, because there are elements that jump out at you and really make you wonder about mental health or stress or the social commentary and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think it's a great question. It's something that I think almost every film this
comes
season
up a lot, yeah.
have asked.
Would you say it's not a horror film based on your experience with horror?
I think it fills my cup as far as everything I want out of a horror movie. That tension. There was specifically one scene that when I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is that. What is going to happen here? How is this going to unfold? There is no jump scare, but I can just tell right now bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about horror movies.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this, the movie, did either of you ever see The Platform?
Yes.
Oh, I love The Platform.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about, like, what other food movies are there out in this genre? And I thought of The Platform, and again, like, this social commentary, but
Yeah.
a very different film.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually want to watch that one again, and just look at the kind of differences.
That's a great film.
It is a good film. Dude, would you say, is it bleaker than this one?
I think so. This one you have the comedy. I think keeps it lighter.
There was no
Yeah.
comedy.
Platform, not a whole lot of comedy.
yeah.
I think Platform's
That's
pretty
fair.
bleak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
and what I liked about the platform was that tension. Like, what is going to happen
Absolutely.
here? How is
Yeah.
this going to unfold? And that's what I love. I never felt like there was going to be a jump scare or anything, but just So
Go
No,
ahead.
you go.
Well, I was just going to say, so it seems to me like we all really enjoyed this film, but we're dying to discuss things that might be
Yes.
spoilers. So I'm just wondering, should we get into spoilers now?
I think
so. Wait a
so.
second. One thing
Okay.
that I like that you guys always do is, what was it that you didn't like about the film, or is that part of the spoilers?
No,
Is
no.
that- do we-
Well, unless it is a spoiler.
yeah, no. So
Why don't you go first?
yeah. Well, no. Now I've
Or do you want us to go
I've
first?
put myself on the spot.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'll say nothing. Like, this would have made. I didn't see it in 2022. I saw it at the beginning of 2023. But this would have been in my top 1 or 2 films of 2022. Like, I thought.
Yeah,
I'd
if
almost
I'd
call it a
seen
masterpiece. Like, I
yeah.
think this is fantastic. Like, I really didn't have any negatives. Every minute of it, I loved. I think the performances are great. The script is great. The cinematography, the music, the social commentary. I think this is really good. I don't have anything I would have written down as a negative, actually, for me. So that gives away what I thought of the film. I think it's amazing. But I didn't have any critiques. Did you?
I had a critique until I watched it the second time.
Oh, interesting. What was that?
So I wasn't. It's not a critique so much as I wasn't sure how I felt about the ending.
Okay.
And then when I watched it the second time, it's like, no, I get it. That makes sense to me. And especially when I
The
went
very end?
the very end, but also the lead up to the very end.
Okay.
So the final sort of the final scene between Chef and Margot, I think perhaps I wasn't paying attention enough the first time, but on second viewing, because that's part of the one, even though I was fast forwarding, I slowed that down because I wanted to see that scene again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I think I now can put the pieces together. And my critique of not liking the ending, I retracted to myself because it's like, no, it makes sense to me now, and I think that works.
Yeah.
There's
So
something.
wait a sec. Are
bothering
you
me.
the final scene? Are you talking about before she leaves the restaurant?
Whoa, spoiler.
Oh,
It's okay.
before she leaves the restaurant, or are you talking about the whole kind of interaction to her being satisfied with her experience and him being satisfied with his role?
So yes to all of that. So
Okay, yeah.
right from that part where she talks about her experience
Yeah.
and the sort of the final interaction between the two of them, and then also the follow up.
I felt the exact same way. I was like, is this just an easy way out?
Yeah.
And then I really started thinking about it, and I was like, oh, that was really well
Thematically for the film, I think it's almost perfect.
Oh,
For
for
me,
sure,
yeah.
for sure.
I think about that when I go to eat sometimes, though. Like, was this an easy way out here? Like, just, but yeah, I really liked the movie. I did, when I saw it, I recommended it to students, but I said, hey, you know what? You should actually, there's some mental health issues that could be brought up in this movie, and that, you know what, I highly recommend this movie because it brings up a conversation.
So can we just be clear? This was not your grade 6 homeroom. This was
It's grade 4, actually, I think.
university students, which I think is totally appropriate.
Yeah. But you know what? One of the things that I really loved about it was that, hey, this brings up a conversation. Let's talk about this, and I thought that was really good. And everything from mental health to how we operate in restaurants and questioning why we do things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah, I'm totally on board. Like, I think it was a great film, and like I said, that for me that was a niggle. It wasn't a criticism until I watched it again. It's like, no.
So you liked it more the second time?
Absolutely.
And I liked it more the second time
Yeah.
as well. Did you watch it once or twice?
Yeah, I've watched it twice.
And did you like it more the second time?
I loved it the first time,
Yeah.
and the second time I just started picking out all of these nuances,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I don't normally watch movies a second time, and that just since listening to the podcast, it's like, there's there are movies that you can watch a second time and that you start picking out the richness of it.
Totally. And this is for sure one of those.
Yeah, because it has all the technical elements that you want in a good film, but then the social commentary, and there is a lot of richness, kind of we're talking about with Ari Aster. Like, you can go back and pick out all these little clues and little things, and even just like the things Tyler was doing, even without talking, but just watching what he was doing. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I didn't catch that the first time through. So, I think it's worth, if you have seen it, even watching it again.
Oh, I would
It's a great
recommend.
rewatch.
Excuse me, I'd recommend watching this more than once for that exact reason. I think if you're a film fan and you love the craft of filmmaking, once you get through a film and you go, oh yeah, I like this, and then if you actually really enjoyed it, go back and look for the nuances that made you love it.
The menu captions when
So
the course came out, and then when Tyler's course came
bullshit.
out, he was just like, oh, that is so well
That's why
done.
there's so many good things. Yeah. 100%. Okay, so it sounds like we're all strong recommend.
6 thumbs up.
6 thumbs up.
6 thumbs up. Awesome.
Spoilers?
Spoilers? Spoilers. Okay.
Hey, just wait.
Who wants to
before
start?
we get into
You did this
spoilers-
last time we talked about spoilers.
Again, I brought some gifts for you.
Ooh,
yeah, we
gifts.
can do-
Yeah. So because we are in spoilers,
Oh, fantastic.
you know what? Instead of bringing condiments without bread, I baked you both some bread
Oh,
today.
wow.
So,
Thank you.
I put it in plastic bags.
You're
'cause I
officially
knew-
invited back on the podcast.
Yeah.
So it's actually bread for the bread plate.
bread for the bread plate. So I thought
I was
that
really hoping
just
for breadless bread plate.
A funny twist.
Now, just to make
on-
you hungry, could do a little ASMR.
I was kind of hoping for s'mores personally, but this is good.
Yeah.
You could, you know what? It would be great with chocolate and marshmallows.
Oh, well, thank you.
You know
That's
what?
very
What I'll do
kind.
is I'll pass on the recipe. You guys can post the recipe. One of my favorite recipes for
Okay,
focaccia
wow.
bread.
That's very
Thank
very
you.
thoughtful
So,
of you. Yeah, I'm
there
sure
you
the
go.
viewers will love that.
Yeah, so you
No
have to make
broken
your
emulsions
own
here.
condiments, and I know you're a great chef.
I am a
so-
great chef. Definitely. I'll do ketchup, mustard, mayo, relish. Yeah.
Can you put a hot dog in this?
I think I can. I'll try. I'll find a way to put a hot dog in it. So.
Well, that's very kind. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
There
that's
you go. And I
amazing.
thought it was just appropriate with that one course. I was chuckling as I was making bread today. I was like,
Oh, that's so good. I'll definitely be having a little bit of that later.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
Who wants to start? Spoilers. Why don't we let our guest begin? Because you said you had some things.
Oh
that
yeah,
you
something
wanted-
you really liked about.
Spoilers. But there's so many things in
Yeah,
this movie,
yeah.
right? When the tech startup guys were like, "Hey, can I have some bread with these condiments instead of just being in the moment?" Right?
Yeah.
And I think he talks about that, like, what did he say about not just eating, but nourishing?
I know the speech you're talking about.
Yeah, and so it's just like, there's no bread. Why does there have to be bread? But I'm willing to bet that every one of those side condiments would have just been amazing, right? When you think about the level of this restaurant, and they're like, no, I want some bread with this. Like, what is your problem? And you know what? I've seen a few restaurants lately that have been like, hey, no substitutions. If you're a vegan or you're a vegetarian, don't come to my restaurant because
that's fair.
This is not what we do, and we do multiple courses. And we, we're doing like thousands of plates every night. So we respectfully ask you to stay away if you have dietary needs.
There are no substitutions.
Yeah.
It was such a good scene, right? Because I totally, I'm not not even a good cook, let alone a chef, but I've been in restaurants and overheard conversations like, do you see it on the menu? No, so don't ask for a substitution. Or can I get this instead of this? Or can you, it's like, and it just drives me, I can't even imagine if I was the person preparing the food, how much that would drive me insane, because I'm just another restaurant goer and it drives me insane.
Yeah, and you know what? Cooks at any level, right? They come in and they cook, and this has been my experience. We cook because we love cooking and we love nourishing. And whether you're working at a Michelin star restaurant or a little burger shop, you've planned it out. You've thought about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And for a lot of times, you're coming in, doing long hours, and you're getting ready and you're all set. And then someone says, "Hey, nice menu, but can I have this?" this?
Yeah.
A cheeseburger.
And it's like, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, so because it was very clever. I liked how each table represented like a different crime or a different offense to kind of the chef from a different angle.
Yeah.
Like they were like, oh yeah, well, we own you, we pay for this place, so you'll do what we want. Or the guy taking pictures of his thing, or the critic who's maybe being overly harsh, or the guy who's like, oh yeah, I can't cook, but I'm going to critique the shit out of your stuff.
Yeah.
Did you, as someone who's a chef, then which of those offenses are there other ones you're like, oh yeah, like I can't wait for you to die? Or like, what was your take on that?
So one, I'd say the critic is more like, hey, you're here because I wrote about you, right? You're here because of me.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Speaking of ego.
Yes.
yeah. I think the worst offense in nourishment and being a gastronome would be being in that space and not really appreciating it. And so I think it would be the movie star. That's
Interesting.
The whole time it's like, yeah, but this is about me, and I'm just filling my belly, and I'm doing it because I got lots of money.
Or the couple member who's like, how many times have you been to this restaurant? Like, you've eaten here every year for like the last 15 years. Name one dish that I've ever made for you. And he's like they were just there for the status rather than
she
for
goes,
the food.
that the best part.
Chowder or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. She goes,
No, it's the cod.
Oh, cod.
And he goes, it was halibut. She's like, what's the difference? He goes, it's a big difference to the person who created it.
He roasts her pretty good,
Yeah,
too.
he does. Yeah.
That's interesting perspective
Yeah.
because John Leguizamo's character was the one like, I'm not sure you deserve to die. Like, I felt like his crime was that he was like an artist who kind of lost his passion. He's just doing jobs. Like, what was the movie he did? That
Dr.
they're
something.
calling Dr. Sunshine. Everyone else, I was like, yeah, I can't wait for you guys to die. I felt a little bad for John Leguizamo's character. I like him as an actor. Maybe I just thought he was kind of funny, but I was like, I'm not sure if you belong in this other crew of characters. But for you, he was the most offensive.
Yeah. I mean, they're all
Okay.
like,
How about you? For you, was there one table that you were like, oh yeah, I can't wait for you guys to get it? Other than Tyler, sounds like Tyler for you, maybe.
Well, Tyler for sure. I mean, the bro startup table was probably my least favorite table.
Yeah.
I think because they had that self entitlement, and that's a real anger point for me. Is that?
Do you think this tortilla will hold up in a court of law? So many funny things to say. Yeah.
But I feel like you struck a nerve there about like the idea of kind of being in the moment and nourishment. And I think like, although I don't know, I do actually, I was going to say, I don't think it comes across, but I do think it comes across at the end, is he was most happy when he was doing the lowliest form of service to people in a social definition.
You're talking about the chef?
The chef, in the sense that he was making cheeseburgers, but he was making people happy. And he says, well, I think one of his best lines is, I've been fooled into trying to satisfy people who can't be satisfied. And I think, so this is where my epiphany came at the end, was the first time I watched the film and I wondered, okay, why did they allow Margot to be the final girl? And I did get it to some degree, because she saw the news, or the news article about his, cheeseburger. She asked him for a cheeseburger.
Well, she's a service person. He's a service person. Like,
Yeah.
they kind of had that bond, maybe.
Yeah.
Because they're used to having to serve others.
Because he says to her, like, I can recognize another service.
Yes. Your name's, I know lots of Margos, and you're not a Margot.
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
No, I just, so what struck a chord with me was that idea of, I think probably for most of us, although I can't speak for anybody other than myself, like either your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, but there's a family meal that you remember, or a family recipe, or something where you can think about that idea of nourishment. Like, I think about my now deceased, but old Hungarian grandmother, who was not satisfied unless you ate the 4 fried ducks and 40 pieces of fried chicken. You know what I mean? Like, there was something about feeding you that represented love, which I think is what's underlying so much of what's going on in this film with the chef, about people not being in the moment, about people not paying attention, about people not enjoying.
Just enjoying his craft for what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Picking it apart and doing all these other things.
Yeah, but not in service to, speaking of service industry, not in service to the chef to make him better, but in service to your own ego,
Yes.
to prove how much you know or how much you can distinguish this flavor from this flavor or whatever. That's not what this is about. And he says, the chef says, I've lost, I can't remember his exact wording, but the gist of it is, I've lost the will to actually cook for other people. It just doesn't give me any joy anymore. And to me, that's it was one of the saddest moments in the film, was when he says, like, I don't get any fulfillment from this anymore. I don't get any enjoyment from this anymore. And I think so much of what, not on the surface, but what underlies the film is that idea of love. I mean, he asks Margot, who's not Margot, do you enjoy the service that you give? And she says, yeah, for the most part. I mean, there was another part to that answer, but anyway, I don't mean to go on and on, but
it's interesting you say that, though. Just recently I was asked to do an event, and they said, well, how much would it cost? And I said, well, you can't pay me for this event. I'm doing it because I appreciate you and that I want to do this event.
Thanks for cooking my barbecue, by the way. I really appreciate that.
Anytime. But it's very much like I have a job. I get paid for that job. And that if I'm going to cook outside of that job, it's because I want to cook and not because I have to cook, or that you can buy my services. And that I still get that joy out of that.
So did you really relate to his character? Or relate to the critiques of the film?
On some levels, for sure. Like, so I think it's the third course that we're talking about where there's a suicide.
Yeah.
Where
the mess.
The mess.
Yes. Not Tyler's bullshit.
Yeah. Where he talks about the sous chef realizing that he'll never be the chef that he is. He'll never be a Michelin star chef. And that, I think, in my own experience, you come into this industry and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to cook, and I want to work for this chef, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And from my own experience was realizing, like, but this isn't me. This isn't the chef, that I want to be. I'm a totally different chef, and that I'll never have a Michelin star restaurant, but I also don't want to spend my life just cooking.
And do you feel like you have to almost kill yourself to get into that position? Is that sort of what it was saying, do you think?
This is, what do I want out of my life experience? To get this, I have to cook nonstop.
Because it's quite competitive. I don't know much about it, but is it kind of like getting into the NHL, like becoming a chef in one of those restaurants? Like, you really have to sacrifice yourself or your life to do that? Like, I don't know how competitive it is or how difficult it would be.
I don't think you can say it as competitive, but you have to be smart.
Okay.
You have to be super smart. There are not a lot of angels that are going to come down and say, here's $10 million. You can have this island and you can create this, this space. And that those angels that do come down, it's because the space that the chef has already created with his team. And that something that's like, wow, you're doing something special here. And a lot of times, like, one example of that is Noma. If you ever watch the documentary about Noma, which is this amazing restaurant that changed the way people look at food, for years people called them seal fuckers. What are you guys doing here? This is ridiculous. And they were laughed at. And now it's like, ugh, these guys are actually on the top. Right. They just have something special with their palate, something, they're artists that work with food, and that it's only there for a minute and you eat it and it's gone. It's a totally different level than, I don't want to say the regular chef.
Right.
But, you can get that same experience out of making a burger or making an amazing meatloaf or cooking for your family. And hopefully you don't get to that point in a restaurant.
Because I've had your food a couple of times. It does seem like you get a lot of joy out of as you said, just like cooking for people, like that act of providing for people and with no expectation of.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes I do it for other people, and sometimes I'm doing it for myself. Like I can reflect on meals that I've done where everyone's eating, this is amazing, and I'm eating just for like reflecting on it and being like, okay, I just want to get to the next course because I'm kind of excited about doing
The
this.
alginate was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your Pondscum, that was really impressive.
Pondscum. Yeah.
Question for you: did you feel guilty at all watching this movie? Because part of me was like, when he's like, all right, get up and I want you to make a meal. And he makes Tyler's bullshit and he's terrible. Because I feel like as podcasters of films, are we sort of in the role of Tyler and the critic a little bit? You and I don't make films. We probably couldn't make a film. Yet here we are with our platform and we're talking about it and we're critiquing. So part of it was like, I felt a little sheepish. I was like, oh, I actually feel like a tiny bit guilty because I wonder if and then my other question for you, I guess, is, are we kind of guilty of that same thing? I don't think so. I feel like we're passionate about film, and it's not like we're doing. Well, I don't know. Anyways, I'm curious. Did that come across at all for you?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't feel guilty, and maybe it's just blindness on my part. I don't feel like we are like Tyler. I feel like
that's good.
We have, like you say, like a passion for film. But I don't feel like we're pretentious about film. Like we'll say, well, I didn't get this, or I don't know this, or I don't pretend to know. I didn't go to film school. I'm just a guy who watched a bunch of movies, and I like certain things and I don't like certain things. And we've been at odds with popular opinion sometimes.
For
where
sure,
it's like, yeah, I didn't really get this, or I don't understand why this is so popular, or what's so. I
just could see the director of Winnie the Pooh coming after you and be like, all right, make me a movie.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, you know what? I loved what you said about Winnie the Pooh, and I was like, oh man, I'm so happy they watched it, so I don't have to watch it. Totally. But there was such a great opportunity. Like, I hope someone takes on these and does a great job with these movies. What I love about what you guys do is that you get into a conversation. Hey, let's get into a dialogue about this. So you're not bringing out your Paco jet and being like, hey, let me tell you about this, and this is how this works, because I know, because I have hours to just play around with this.
We're certainly not making or breaking anyone's film careers here. Like, we're a Nothing Burger podcast, so it's...
Yeah.
Whereas the critic there, I think his complaint, his attack on her is like, I know some of my friends, right, that you made them close their restaurant. Maybe people wielding that influence... And I think, in a real negative way, was his critique.
I think you could argue that for high-powered critics.
Yeah.
Like a Roger Ebert probably could have made or broken careers, right? But yeah, two schmoes, well, okay, one schmo anyway, in an upstairs bedroom, I don't think is going to do that. But I mean, I believe that that's the beauty of the age that we're in, is that democratization of opinion. You don't have to rely on the learned, the Illuminati. You can just get together with somebody that shares your passion and talk about whatever it is you're passionate about. And it's not meant to necessarily influence somebody other than, hey, we both watched this film. Here's what he thought. Here's what I thought. Here's what we thought was good. Here's what we didn't think was good. You go figure it out for yourself, right?
It's kind of like the retired woman that was critiquing just casual dining restaurants. And I can't remember the name. It's like a...
Karen.
Karen. But, some people gave her a hard time. Like, who are you to talk about the Olive Garden? And it was like, well, actually, she's got a valid opinion. And that, you know what, let's listen to what she has to say. And I think it's the same for anyone that's interested. Hey, I'm interested. I go out to eat, so this is what I'm going to talk about.
And I go spend my money on this stuff,
Yeah, and maybe they're going to go to a restaurant that no one knows about, that people aren't critiquing, that the New York Times isn't looking at, and that it's like, wow, I actually want to go there and try the chili there, or try the bread at this restaurant, because it's free bread, and it just keeps on coming. Maybe that's what I want, and that's okay.
Yeah, and did you think this was about the culinary industry, or did you get the sense that this was more about art? Like, the subject matter is the culinary industry, but you were watching a film So in my mind, I was almost thinking, because he refers to it as art many times.
Totally.
And art, like films, also have critics, and they have influencers, and they have budgets, and they have. I was sort of wondering if he was using the culinary industry as like a mask for actually the film industry, and I wonder if they were talking about films, and that's maybe where I started to feel that guilt, but then starting to see like, oh yeah, all these things would apply the same. Like sometimes someone just wants to sit down and enjoy like a movie, like whatever the cheeseburger equivalent of a film is, rather than what they say over.
Movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And critics can pick apart a Marvel movie and say, oh, that's just trash and it's not good filmmaking. But so many people just derive entertainment and enjoyment of that experience. So I started to think maybe this. Yeah, I don't know. Did you get the sense that it was laser targeted on the culinary arts, or was it about art in general, or maybe even about film more than it was about?
Yeah, I think it has a pretty
arts?
broad brush, because I think for sure you can make equivalencies to any kind of artistic endeavor, right? Whether it's music or, I mean, this is, I think it's
over intellectualizing. Is that what they say in the film at one point?
Yeah, and I think it's about that whole idea of the snobbery in anything, right? Like the purists in any category. I mean, I think about, I'm not a very good guitar player, but I enjoy playing guitar. And as soon as you get into the guitar world or any world, you've all of a sudden got these strata, right? Yeah. The stratification of, oh, well, that's not a tube amp, so it's not very good. Or that's not a 59 Les Paul. There's just this ridiculousness. It's like,
the banana on the wall. There was like an art installation of this $100,000 banana on the wall, and some kid ate it, and it was like, whoa,
So I guess the message is like artists create art for people to enjoy, and people should just enjoy their art, whether it's film or music or food or. Because it's all about, you said elite, I think you said elitism, or you made reference to being elite.
Yeah.
And that's what this film really seems to go after. Like, here's a private island, and you got to take a boat, and you have to get a special invitation, and it's $12.50 a plate. And everything about it was just like, this was totally elite. And so when she comes and just wants a humble cheeseburger, that's so fulfilling. And I just wonder if that's what they were... If that's where their critique was.
But there's so much stuff, too, that's happening in the culinary world that's a reflection of this movie as well.
Interesting,
right?
okay,
Some of the top chefs in the world right now are making a lot of money opening burger joints. Yeah. And they're looking at the burger and going, what makes the best burger? So we are going to break this down, and we're going to not just say this is the best burger, but I've thought about this.
Right.
This is why you don't put lettuce and tomato on a burger. This is why this is what you get on a burger. This is why you put American cheese on the burger, because it actually kind of melts into like a nice sauce. And, like that was almost a direct quote out of another chef that I know that's like has done this 2-minute YouTube video on what makes the best burger. Right. And so suddenly you've got these really elite chefs that are just like, I'm actually just making a really good burger. So there was lots of connections to what's going on in the industry right now. You can actually make a living making burgers.
Yeah.
You're very hard pressed to make a living in a Michelin star restaurant.
Yeah.
It's
that's
it
interesting.
is super challenging. Yeah, like there was one chef that closed his restaurant, and I think 2 years before he closed it, to make money, they had to double the prices and double the seating. So and they went from a 12-seat restaurant to a 24-seat restaurant, and this was in the middle of nowhere in Sweden. Where it's like, wow, to make a go at this. Yeah. It's a horror film.
Yeah. I'll come to you, Zach. I'm curious. Do you like fine dining?
Not really.
Like, I kind of really related to the, like, I just want, like, a really good cheeseburger. Because I find with fine dining, I've done it a few times, it's often very expensive. I find the portions are often very small. And it's not always that much better. But maybe, I know... I don't want to offend you here.
No,
I'm just curious. Like, for me, like, I
offended.
tend to not go towards the fine dining. Do you relate to that at all? Or
So we...
like, the giant rock and the plating with this tiny little morsel on top is so funny, because I feel like I've almost had that experience. Not that extreme, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's fine dining and there's pretend fine dining.
Yeah.
And so are you going to an upscale Earl's and paying... And there's nothing wrong with Earl's, right?
No,
Like,
no, I get it. Yeah.
There's a place for.
Can we get sued for that? Or
Yeah.
have to edit that
Isn't
out?
that a sponsor?
An upscale chain restaurant of some sort.
That's right.
So
One of our 3 listeners is the CEO of Earl's. So.
Earl's does an amazing job, but
Okay.
Earl's White Spot, is this
yeah.
like an upscale version of that, or is it really fine dining?
Really, yeah.
Right. There is a difference, and that when I spend my money, it's like, okay, so am I going to spend $100 for my wife and I to go and eat? Is she going to spend $100, or are we going to spend $300?
Yeah.
And there's going to be a difference in that experience, and there's not a lot of restaurants like that. Right.
No.
So when you say, my experience hasn't been very good, I would question, like, where have you gone out?
100%. Yeah.
And this is not something you want to do every day.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that it's really a special occasion. And, we just went on a little trip, and the highlight of the trip was going to this restaurant that serves bologna sandwiches. And you can only order one at a time, and they were $4. And they just hit all of those notes of sour, sweet, crunchy, and you had that with a cherry cola. It was amazing.
I was going to say to you, I don't know that I've actually had the experience of truly fine dining. I think I would definitely say that's not where I would choose to go, simply because I'm always self-conscious about, do I know which utensil to use in which order? Am I going to spill something? Is something, going to happen or whatever? And I think about the experiences that I've had in restaurants where, like, probably one of my better food experiences, at least the one that I remember, I was in New York, and I wanted a corned beef on rye from a New York deli. That was when I was in New York. I wanted to have a New York experience. And I went into this deli, and they were closed. Like, I saw they had the meat cases were covered and whatever. And I was so disappointed. And the guy behind the counter said, "Okay, what do you want?" Like,
wow.
Very New York. He was very aggressive but he was willing to help me. I said, "I just want a corned beef on rye." This is 2002. It was right after 9/11. So the year after.
Wow.
It was $14 in 2002 for a sandwich, which I'm sure was probably $40 now for a sandwich in New York.
It's like $75.
So, I mean, as a guy from a small town in Duncan, it was just like, well, $14. But I wanted that sandwich, and he made that sandwich for me, and I loved it.
Yes.
Like, it was just like, it was everything I imagined a corned beef on rye in New York City would be, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like, we've talked about this with film, and I think it's the same with any art form, but I think part of your journey and your enjoyment or not of whatever it is that you're talking about is where are you at in not just in your life, but are you open to experiencing whatever that experience is going to give you? Like, yes, I could have been disappointed in New York City for sure, but I wasn't. Because I thought, oh, it's New York City and it's just great and I love being here, even though I was terrified because I had 70s New York in my head, and it was not like that at all. No. Like, you saw a cop every third person on the sidewalk. Like, it was so safe. But I was open to the experience of wanting to have a good time and wanting the people to. They weren't friendly. They were gruff. But they were helpful. They were willing to help you out, but they just didn't have time. It's like, it's busy, it's hustle bustle. It's like, I'm just get out of my way. Okay, I'll tell you where to go, and then just leave me alone. But I loved it. Like, and I'm not a big city person.
I've heard only good things about New York. I would like to go.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, and we did a hot dog stand. I can't remember what the famous hot dog place is in New York City, but it's kind of like going for pizza in Chicago or whatever. I mean, probably New York.
New York,
yeah,
New York pizza,
Brooklyn would probably say something about that. But there's the same thing. Like, I think I lined up for like 25 minutes for this hot dog.
Wow.
But in the moment, it would be like eating a hot dog in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
There's something about the experience of eating it and where you're eating it and who you're eating it with and all the surrounding stuff, right?
I've been in a lot of amazing restaurants where it's just like, you can tell this is really good food, but they're giving you value for money. It's not $75 for a plate, but it's delicious and the flavors are good and the quality is good. The fine dining thing is more like there's this restaurant in town. I won't say they've just switched to like a fine dining. I don't think it's done well, but every ingredient has like 4 qualifiers. Like this is hand-picked snowy peas from the Alps, and this is like every ingredient has like 5 things, and they bring you this little plate, and there's not much food, and it's very expensive. I just feel ripped off. Conversely, I think what you're saying, there's many amazing chefs who just make great food.
Yeah.
And you know what I love about what you said there is, that fine dining experience for me. I remember being in New York just before 9/11 and going to my first fine dining experience. And I was nervous, and I showed up, and the maitre d', Elsa in this movie, you know what? He was like, hey, come with me for a second. And he went just over to the side, and he got me a jacket because I wasn't wearing a jacket. I was wearing a collared shirt. I had a tie on, but I didn't have a jacket. When I took off my, it was October. It was cool out.
Yeah.
I'm from the West Coast. We don't have jackets. Here's my
dudes with the
jacket.
dead hoodie.
And he did it in such a way that made me feel good.
Yeah.
And it's the same with this guy, right? He's just making a sandwich, but he's like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna make you a sandwich.
That's super cool. He made it for you.
We're at our core, we're hosting people, and whether it's a restaurant or your house, this is my job. And I think Elsa did a really great job there. And in that one scene that I think was really tense, where she came in with Anna Taylor-Joy, and she was getting the barrel, and she was like, "Chef didn't tell me about this."
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And that was that tension, right? And, And then the fight that happens.
Yeah.
I was
That's
just
so
like, what a
good.
great fight. And she just wants to make everything right, and she just broke down there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm catching all the balls that everyone's dropping, right? And my job is to make sure everyone's taken care of.
For a minor role, she was a very strong character.
Yes.
Like in Big Impact.
Yeah.
Did you ask for substitutions when you went for fine dining in New York? Or?
No,
No.
I never asked for substitutions.
Can I get the corned beef on rye, but with ham and
Yeah, and
on
you
some
actually have it
sourdough?
on sourdough.
I'm curious, what did you both think of the final dish, which I didn't quite get maybe the first time, and then this time I paid more attention. The s'mores, when he calls it the most offensive assault on the
Yes.
human palate ever contrived, s'mores, and I think that he was kind of sounding like
it's
you guys
everything
are
wrong with us.
Yeah, everything wrong with food. That's you guys, and we're gonna make that's the final dessert. I thought I didn't quite get the significance of it the first time. Did you like the s'more thing? Because that's where the film gets a little bit ridiculous. It's like, oh, you guys are gonna wear mushroom suits and wear the chocolate hats, and I could see that maybe turning
that
people
was
off.
over the top. Like, hey, I'm gonna make this over the top.
Yeah.
I would think at that level, maybe they could have put a little more into the budget of making the marshmallows and maybe making like a solid, like, hey, stand up. We're going to put this full marshmallow over top of you instead of like this collared kind of marshmallow thing.
It is a slight critique for me the first time I watched it. I wasn't quite sure what to think of the s'more thing, but I liked it the second time.
Yeah, I have to say that was one of the things I thought of, like, could they have thought of another dessert? But I think it kind of fits into that, ridiculousness of like, hey, and now you're just getting a s'more for dessert.
But I think there's, yes, I hear what you're saying about that. But if you listen to what he talks about, like the speech that you just referenced, he talks about the bad chocolate.
That's true.
And the
how's he say
the sugar water and the industrial
the unethically sourced chocolate.
And the industrial graham crackers, and this is everything that's wrong with society, right? And so for me, I thought it was perfectly fitting, but it was also absolutely, gorgeous when they did the overhead shot of like gorgeous and horrific, obviously. For me, the thing that was over the top was when he reaches in and grabs the coals, and he's
that's true.
walking out to set himself on fire, and I'm like, okay, that's a long time to be holding red hot coals, and why hasn't it burned through your fist? Is what I wanted to know.
Yeah,
but those are so like in the moment. Those are only in hindsight where it's like, okay, I'm going to critique this. In the moment, it serves the scene. It serves the film, I think.
So I have to say, I think that for me actually represented just the pain of being in the restaurant and having to push through. So that long walk holding the coals, like how many times have I burnt myself and just have to push through, right? Or, you know, I've actually cut myself and cauterized it on the stove because that was easier.
You've done that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Than having to stop and be like, oh, I need a bandage. It's like, Francois, we're in service.
Yeah.
Like, get back
Dedication.
myself, chef. It's like, yeah. So, you know, why aren't you on the line then? Like, yeah, chef. So it's like, okay. Now it's not bleeding, and now I can continue cooking, right? So I could see that of just like, I'm holding.
Yeah, it
the
represented
coal.
something for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I thought for a sec that was maybe a thematic disconnect. Because I'm like, oh well, isn't the s'more kind of like the cheeseburger, like the dessert equivalent of a cheeseburger? But now when you reference the poor quality ingredients, then maybe it makes more sense.
Embrace the flame.
That's right. Yeah.
So, you know, one of the first things we learn when we're cooking is like when you flip something in a pan, you flip it away from you. Because if you flip it towards you, it's going to splash towards you, right? And I remember being in the super high pressured space, and it was actually in New York. And I'm poissonnier, I'm cooking the fish, and I'm cooking a piece of bass. Start of service, first fish, sear it, it's in clarified butter, and I flip it towards me. I had clarified butter going all up my arm, probably 3rd degree burn.
That sounds painful.
I had to hold that coal for the rest of service. Like, I had to feel that pain. So it definitely represented that, like, he's feeling that pain right there. So there was something in it for sure for me, and just the experience.
Yeah. Is that it?
Well, I think we could. I'm just looking at the clock going, okay, we're coming up on an hour and 15.
Oh,
so
are we? Okay.
Just out of respect for our listeners, we may want to just put a bow on this, I think. But yeah, I mean, we could probably talk for another couple hours about this film.
But thanks for coming out. Like, it was really interesting. And when I was watching it, I actually thought of it. I was like curious, like, what would a chef think of this film? And so, like, do you have a final takeaway of just as someone in that world, what the message was to you, or what you would take away from it?
I think, you know, it was just a great movie. And there's so many things there, and I think it's just a great opportunity to pause and take a deep breath and reflect on, you know, what are you bringing to the table, and you know, just slowing down and appreciating things for sure.
And did you because I found my relationship to the chef, at first he's kind of like the villain, but I felt sympathized with him by the end. The villain? No, not at all. I love you. No, but I thought because he's kind of the villain character before you know what's going on.
Totally.
And he just slowly, the more he talks and the more you get what he's doing with the evening, like I just found I was really on his side by the end. So it was cool to see that evolution.
I agree.
Where I saw him as in a negative light, like a more malevolent force. But then as it went on, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm rooting for you now.
I totally think he's like an anti-hero character.
Yes.
Like he is characterized as kind of the bad guy at the beginning, and but then I agree, like once he lays out his arguments for things, and you go, yeah, you pretty much all deserve to burn in hell, so let's light this restaurant on
and
fire.
the taco shell thing was maybe the best thing in the whole movie, how they all had
it was so good. I mean,
all their vices.
Like there's spoilers that there's some scenes that are really like eye-opening that we haven't even talked about. So I think it's awesome because you still have some surprises left for you when you go watch the film. There are some scenes that are just really out there. That it's just great from top to bottom. I think
it's so rich.
Yeah, like I think if you enjoy performances, there's something there for you. If you enjoy the visuals, there's something there for you. If you're a foodie and you love that kind of stuff, there'll be a message, a takeaway for you. But like we've been talking about here, I think just sitting down and enjoying the film for what it is.
Just like the cheeseburger.
Yeah, just like the cheeseburger. Fantastic. It was so good to have your input on this one.
Is there anything you want to plug? Any projects, anything you're doing? Your Instagram?
No, I plug you guys. You guys are great. You inspire me to listen to more or watch more horror movies. So.
We have to have him on every Sunday night.
Totally.
Totally appreciate it. And so thank you for the work.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. That's great perspective.
Yeah.
All
right. So I guess we've got actually 2 episodes. I'm not gonna spoil who our guest is. We've got a season finale guest.
Yes.
And we've got I don't know what we're doing for episode 9, but we've got
it's a surprise.
Surprise for episode 9, and a very big surprise for episode 10, which is going to be the finale of season 4.
That's right.
Coming up in December. So, and my apologies for Mother Nature. You might have heard the rumbling of thunder in the background as we were doing this, but what can you do? At least the power didn't go out on us.
That was Francois' bowels, I think.
I'm going to cut this bit. Okay.
Thanks for listening, and
And we'll see you in the aisles.